He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Welcome, folks. Thanks for joining us. This is the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast with Dr. Philip Ovadia, and we have something special today, really special to me. And here's why it's special, Phil. Steve actually sent me a written bio.
Oh, there we go. Read that.
I'm going to read the 50-word bio.
Wow.
Dr. Stephen Riggs, with 27 different
letters,
degrees, letters, whatever behind his name. MD, FACP, FAAP, DBOM, DABOM. What is that?
The DBOM is my favorite one. That's the diplomat of the American Board of Obesity Medicine. Isn't that great?
That is awesome. Dr. Riggs is DBOM. CKNS MHP. Received his MD in 1987 and is triple board certified in internal medicine, pediatrics, and obesity medicine. He is also a certified ketogenic nutrition specialist, and this is why he's here, and has used this training to start a comprehensive weight loss, obesity, diabetes, and metabolic center. I was just so struck by the fact that, I honest to God, we're well over 200 now. I think this is the first time I've ever had anybody send me a bio that was so simple and straightforward, and I just wanted to do him the honor of using it. So at this point, Phil, I'm going to turn it over to you two guys and enjoy the conversation.
I mean, nothing else to say from an intro standpoint, except he is the bomb. And I'm now thinking, man, I need to go get my obesity medicine certification so I can be the bomb as well. But
there you go.
I was fortunate to meet Steve a few months ago at one of the low-carb conferences. I can't quite remember which one it was at this point.
Boca Raton.
There we go, at Low-Carb Boca. And just, had a great conversation. And, Steve is really one of the doctors, right, in the trenches doing the work. And I always love talking with the doctors that are actually doing the work, how to get him on. He's the author of the book that you see behind him there, Keto MD. I highly recommend, and was fortunate to get a copy of that. And just wanted to give Steve a chance to talk to our audience, introduce himself, and kind of talk about what he does. So with that, Steve, why don't you give your background, maybe talk about why you got interested in obesity and what led you to the ketogenic diet.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. As you so eloquently put it in that bio, I am board certified in internal medicine, pediatrics. I was happily going about my life as a primary care doc in the trenches, like you said, Phil. Was doing that for 30 years. I've been practicing medicine for 38 years. And first 30 years, I was going about fine. And then a lot of good things in my life, it kind of came about through my wife. She decided she wanted to become a health coach. So great, so she was always interested in health and nutrition. And she ran across Jason Fung's book, The Obesity Code. I'm sure you know Jason and everything. And she said, hey, put your doctor hat on and tell me what you think of this book, so this approach. So I pick it up, and to be honest with you, at that point in my life, I was super skeptical. Somebody's found the code for obesity, like sure they have, and at that point I hadn't had any luck helping people lose weight. So I'm reading the book. It's a low carb approach. People lose weight, but every diet book tells you that, right? But then he started talking about people reversing their diabetes. And I was like, no. I was like, look, this is what I do. I take care of people, tons of people with diabetes. I was never taught that. It was always just this progressive chronic disease. To be honest with you, I just kept adding more and more medication until finally patients got on insulin, and then they ended up on somebody like Phil's table, or they died, of cardiovascular disease. But fortunately, I said, you know what, that's testable. So I grabbed a handful of my patients and I tried it out, and bam, it worked. Like, it worked fast. And that's when my head literally exploded. And I was like, what in the world is this? Nobody taught me this in medical school. And I may not be the brightest bulb in the box, but I know how to read the medical literature. And so I took a deep dive into the medical literature, asking two questions, basically. One, is this really safe? And is it really that effective? Is it efficacious? Is there scientific backing for it? And of course, as you guys know, we all know yes and yes are the answers to those things. And then I'm off to the races, right? So then I'm starting to implement this in my practice. And my gosh, I keep coming out of my exam room to pestering my colleagues. Oh my gosh, this guy's off 50 units of insulin. This woman's down 40 pounds in, 3 months. And, I'm seeing all this stuff happening. And I just can't, once you see it, you can't not see it. And so this is going on. And, initially, it was kind of low hanging fruit. There were the people there's some people who are just super self-motivated. You kind of introduce the concept of insulin resistance and, so on, and they run with it and stuff. But what I found is that most garden variety patients that I took care of just needed help. They needed support, in fact, they need 4 things. They need education. I think they need encouragement. They need practical help, like food lists and, things like that. And then they need accountability. They need really close follow-up. And so Janice, that's my wife, we kind of created this intensive course we call the Low-Carb Bootcamp. And so it evolved into a 8-week kind of intensive course. I was giving lectures to groups of patients, 50 to 70 at a time. People would come in and, and it kind of evolved, but it was more than just knowledge transfer, right? It was more like a lab because we were doing the ketogenic diet together, intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating. We checked labs before and after. I talked my health system into doing this for us. So we checked A1Cs and insulin and HOMA-IRs and stuff like that. We had a biometric,
What was that last
scale.
one after the A1C?
HOMA-IR.
I've heard that one.
Okay, it's just a measure of insulin resistance.
Oh, okay.
Homeostatic insulin resistance level. Easy to do. And in fact, I'll tell you what, Jack, it is probably the biggest thing that nobody's testing right now. I mean, Phil knows this. I mean, it's insulin resistance that's driving everything. And, everyone's worried about their LDL when really it's their insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia that's the problem.
Gotcha. So
we're doing this on patients and we're checking all this stuff. And people are going through it. And man, I'm tracking everybody with this, So after a while, people are then being referred to me. So now I've got a referral practice going on. People are coming to my practice. And fast forward to today, and we've kind of melded the low-carb boot camp with my referral practice. And maybe you do something similar, Phil, is, people go through this educational process. We built a team of people with health coaches that are especially trained in ketogenic nutrition. I talked to our chief dietitian and diabetic educator who fortunately was very open. She read everything I gave her and she became a certified ketogenic nutrition specialist too. And then even one of our mental health counselors, interestingly, he took the boot camp because he was curious. He had heard, as we see that keto is being used for mental health disorders, he was curious about that. Found out through our testing that he was pre-diabetic, so it became real to him real fast. And then he lost 40 pounds, reversed his pre-diabetes. And then I talked him into taking Bitten Johnson's, food addiction training, which he did. It was a year-long deal. Robert Lustig's involved with that and everything. And so he's a certified food addiction specialist. So I've got this team of people and, we've evolved to the point where my goal was to get my administration to give me the green light to create a full-time metabolic clinic. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm going into that space full-time now.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, a lot to dive in there, but I think I want to start with, you just wrapped up talking about how you're trying to get the health system that you're affiliated with to do this. And they've already kind of been on board with some stuff. And that, is something that a lot of times we talk about the way that the health system doesn't support work like this or, doesn't really have a place for it to fit. So maybe talk about that perspective as to how you see this fitting in with the healthcare system and how you're able to partner with your system on this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Phil. I think if I've contributed anything to this space is that I've kind of done what needs to be done. I think we need to take the whole therapeutic carbohydrate restriction out of the ivory tower. We always need more research. In fact, I'm publishing some of our data, but we need to get it into the primary care practice where the patients are, right? I mean, it is the major driver of our $3.8 trillion healthcare tab in this country. We need to get our healthcare systems on board rather than fighting us on this. So that was my thing. And I think several things helped with that. Probably number one is early on when I first started doing this back in like 2017, I ran into David Unwin, and he gave me some very prescient advice. He said, track your patients. And if there's any docs out there that are thinking of getting into this, I'd tell them the same thing. He said, set up a simple spreadsheet, track their weights and biometrics and labs and stuff. So I did. And so 1,200 patients later, I'm still doing it. And so I've got this data. And, we've got a 73% type 2 diabetes reversal rate. I use the old definition of, people come off all medications for their diabetes except for possibly metformin. I tend to leave that on for a while, and A1C is less than 6.5. I mean, we have people on over 310 units of insulin a day who now take zero insulin. Wow. And, when you see those kind of numbers, I mean, your administration gets, the wheels start rolling. In fact, one time when we were doing the boot camp in person, one of the guys taking it was a healthcare economist. That's what he did for a living for United Healthcare. Okay. So these people, we got about 70 people. They're all sitting around violating HIPAA right and left. I mean, they're just talking about their labs and their A1Cs reduction and everything going on, And I see him, I'm looking at him over there, and the wheels are turning. And during a break, he comes up to me, he goes, "This is crazy." I go, and he goes, "You're not making any money at this." And I go, "Tell me about it," because at the time I wasn't getting paid anything to do this. And he goes, but he said this, he goes, "But you're saving a ton of money." And, so we started looking into that. And absolutely, it costs insurance companies about $16,000 a year to have type 2 diabetes, $10,000 in direct medical costs. Well, you start, reversing all this, and, it's incredible savings, right? We had a biostatistician who went through the first 220 patients that came to my office through the referral center, just 220 patients, mind you. And we went through, and I kept track of what meds these people were coming off of. Bottom line is we saved over $550,000 per year just in drop pharmaceuticals, just from 220 patients. So that's one doc, 220 patients. So I've presented this data as I've gone along multiple times to my administration. They get it, right? And so it's, we need to start doing this. And really, I'm not asking for a big operating room or fancy equipment. Just give me a room. I need a few people to help me out. And really, I'm just telling people to change their grocery list. So it doesn't cost a lot of money. It's like a no-brainer. And, we need to do this. Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. Talk about, as a physician, you went from, diabetes is not reversible to 73% reversal of diabetes, right? In, a decade or so of practice, whatever it was that it took that. But talk about that, that mindset change, to go from, this is not a reversible disease to, oh yeah, I can reverse this in just about anyone.
It is amazing. I mean, I agree. I think Eric Westman said it, best. He said, keto works for everybody if they do it. And that's been my experience. Unlike a drug, I'm used to drugs, that's how I make my living. And, they work for some people, they don't work for other people. They have side effects, blah, blah, blah. Keto is, man, it's just like it. So nutrition went from being basically irrelevant to me. I don't know about your training, Phil, but I got almost zero nutritional training. What little I did was probably wrong. And now it's the biggest tool in my toolbox by far. Okay. So it is a super powerful metabolic tool. And frankly, just trying it out, the numbers don't lie. I couldn't believe it. It's just mind blowing. And my patients, whom I'd taken care of for 30 years, some of them, some of them I put on insulin 5 or 10 years previously. I'm now taking them off. They serve as their own controls. So again, it was tracking that information. That's kind of I was just curious. That was primarily why I did it. That it just stacked up, and it just became increasingly clearer and clearer. And then, of course, as you go into the literature, you see that this is replete. And then, by golly, you know, my pediatric practice, right? So I'm half a pediatrician too. And so to implement this with kids, to see it with pregnant women, I mean, starting to see a lot of people coming in with fatty liver disease. Our largest GI group in town just called me last week and said, man, we got all these people with, you know, fatty liver disease, MASLD D, but we don't even have a dietitian. Can we send them to you? I'm like, absolutely. You know, I mean, I'm seeing people with crazy things get better. I mean, case reports of, you know, woman with hemochromatosis, and she's getting better, you know, and all sorts of things. Of course, I've seen people with neurologic disorders, so the epilepsy, for which the ketogenic diet was invented for, of course, in 1921, you know, and dementia. I mean, I'm seeing people actually improve we talk about the mental health issues. I'm not a psychiatrist, but a lot of my patients that I'm treating for obesity and diabetes, you know, they reverse those things, but hey, doc, I don't need my venlafaxine anymore. You know, I mean, it just is gone, you know, I mean, all these things, those the indications started stacking up for me, Phil. And I'm starting to realize, wait a second, this thing is a lot bigger than just a weight loss tool. This thing is the major driver of virtually all our non-communicable diseases, which 75% of us in America die from. We don't die from tuberculosis and stuff anymore. We die from non-communicable disease, of which obesity and diabetes are the major drivers. And, you know, this is the antidote. I mean, we didn't have this in 1900, right? I mean, diabetes was rare. I mean, the average American ate about 5 pounds of sugar per year. Today, it's 152 pounds a year, man. We just aren't made to handle that, and all the chronic diseases that come with it. To me, you can't just throw GLP-1s and weight loss surgery at this. I mean, it's a lifestyle problem. It needs a lifestyle solution. And so that's, to me, where it's at.
And, you know, talk about the, you know, actually implementing with people, right? You're in Iowa, you got corn and wheat and, you know, soy all around you, basically.
That's right.
And, you know, what's it like doing this with, I'm imagining you don't have some super wealthy population or anything like that. You're doing this with regular people, right? The average Joe.
Yep.
You know, how do they respond? How easy or challenging is it for them to implement this?
Yeah, that's where I think, you know, a lot of people need that education. There's a lot of what we call 180s to the, you know, well-formulated ketogenic diet. You know, like fat is okay. You know, that's not a bad thing. You know, that you actually need more salt. You actually don't need any carbohydrates. You know, I mean, there are no essential carbohydrates. You know, so there's all sorts of things that we go through with people that they need to, you know, rewire themselves. And, you know, but people are open to it. And most people, when they've never heard of insulin resistance, you know, they've never heard of that before. But once they understand that concept, you know, it makes sense to them and they go with it. Fasting is good. In fact, you know, fat burning efficiency in a human being's increases over the next 9 months. I mean, we're actually very good at it if given the opportunity. And so incorporating fasting, that scares people too. So there's a lot of things, but we kind of baby step it. So we start off with just saying, hey, you know what? After we kind of introduce the concept and they understand that, we say, you know what, just eat no more than 3 meals a day and just avoid obvious sugar, okay? And then we're going to send you information 3 times a week, and you're going to have this video series to watch. And I published a manual. It's kind of that you're going to read week by week, and it kind of steps people through the process. We're going to give you a meal plan. Okay, we're going to give you a ketogenic meal plan. So while you're figuring out how to count your carbs and what's good and what's not good, you're just going to experience the ketogenic diet. And we're going to do that together. Okay, we've written a cookbook. So you're going to be able to, you know, if you don't like something, you can substitute it out for something else. But I think the best way for people to experience the wide, wonderful world of the rich, delicious food that we get to enjoy is just, let's give them a meal plan initially. And then we're going to talk a lot about coaching these people. So as we go through, like, how do you eat out? How do you travel? How do you handle sabotage? How do you handle food cravings? You know, What about food addiction? We found that about a third of the people that come to see me have binge eating disorder and frank food addiction. We can measure that with the Yale Food Addiction Scale, and so we've been tracking that now for the past few years. And what's amazing is that 95% of the people who have frank food addiction, when I repeat that scale 8 to 12 weeks later, they don't have food addiction anymore. And I'm sure you hear this from people, geez, doc, I don't have the food cravings. I don't have the food noise that I used to have. That's real. And my food addiction specialist is sitting there going, you need to publish this, because it's like, there's nothing that does that. The closest thing we're getting to in the literature are the GLP-1s that are being used for addiction, but they're working the same way. They're working the same way as the ketogenic diet. So for all these things, we're trying to hit on all these factors, the coaching, the practical helps, the encouragement. I follow people monthly. They come back and see me. We're putting CGMs on people, so I can creep on them. I tell them, look, I'm going to creep on you. I'm going to watch your blood sugars, so I can call you and back off your medication appropriately and safely and stuff like that. It's helping people do that. And it's kind of a continuous care model. I think that's what's different, Phil, from the way you and I were trained, is like, it was episodic. The way I practice medicine is, you see people maybe, 3 times a year, you wait till something breaks, you fix it, then they come back when it's broken again. This is a different thing. So I'm going to be following them closely until they're flying.
This is so cool on so many levels. The one that struck me was the positive response that you've gotten from your healthcare organization, and the positive response you got from the United Health. What'd you call him? A medical?
He was a healthy care economist is what he was.
Healthcare economist.
He went and actually talked to the medical director of United Healthcare up in Minneapolis about this. And they're actually, of course, they're very interested. I mean, you can imagine insurance companies are laughing all the way to the bank,
Oh God, yes.
So it's like, I don't know about you, Phil, I've always had this antagonistic relationship with insurance companies because they were always preventing me from doing what I wanted to do. In this case, we make strange bedfellows because our interests are aligned, because the healthier that patient, they just get to collect premiums and don't have any claims, so they make more money. The patient's happier and healthier, and that's awesome. So we're actually kind of on the same page. And the thing is, they're interested because, they tried to implement something as an insurance company themselves. It doesn't work because patients don't trust them. They don't have the patients. We have the patients. Yeah. We have their trust, right? So that's the goal. And so they're very interested in that. I think another way, that the reason why this helped is I live in a medium-sized community. I've been here for 30 years. I know most of the people, most of my, the CEO, the VP, they're friends of mine, basically, if you have some relational capital, that's helpful. And then, you just, you do things like this, and, you start putting on stuff. I remember David Unwin said, do stuff for free, and yeah, I just do the boot camp, and, people love it, and the administration sees it, and they're like, maybe there's something to this. Now, every once in a while, I get a patient who comes in. I had one patient come in a while ago. They're like, my doctor told me not to be here because she said if I do this, I'm going to develop DKA. And I'm like, look, you don't have type 1 diabetes, number one, so it's impossible. Okay. Number two, if you give up eating Twinkies, you're not going to have DKA. Okay. That's just not the way it works.
DKA is
diabetic ketoacidosis, right?
Okay.
Sorry. So it's a life-threatening acidotic condition that type 1 diabetics get when they get really sick, And so that's a physician telling a patient that who doesn't have type 1 diabetes. I'm like, man, so there's a lot of, you have to help. And then one thing I do, and this is just advice to any other physicians out there doing that, is I communicate every patient I see, every time I see them, I send a note to the referring doc. Hey, Dave, here's what's happening, and here's what's happening with this patient. They've lost 20 pounds, and hey, their A1C is now 6.7, and hey, they've come off insulin. And as they get those things over time and over the years, you just keep doing it. They get educated, they get comfortable, and maybe Riggs isn't crazy, and they start sending me more patients, and they don't say that you're going to develop DKA.
Yeah. Are you getting a lot of pushback on the, you're gonna kill their hearts with eating all that fat and
Yeah. The biggest group are my cardiologists. Again, I know them, they're great guys, but they're the ones that are so wedded to saturated fat and cholesterol. I think they're the kind of the hardest nut to crack. But I tell my patients, in fact, I tell them, look, don't tell your cardiologist you're doing keto. Okay. In fact, don't tell anybody you're doing keto, because they're going to think you're going to die or something. Tell them you're doing, low carb Mediterranean, or tell them, you're giving up sugar and processed food. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just code. Okay. I mean, I'm like, the word keto triggers people, especially I think cardiologists for some reason. So I just don't use that term with them. They love the Mediterranean diet, which nobody can define, by the way. But you can make this low carb Mediterranean, and they're happy as a clam.
I've joked that, I think we need to call it the GLP-1 mimicking diet, because, I mean, there is a lot of overlap, right? And everyone loves those medications now. This is a diet that has many of the same physiologic effects without needing the medication.
And even if you use the medication, you have to do this. I don't know.
Yeah.
I use the GLP-1s, but proper patient selection is key. I mean, the guy who, I think it's like a pyramid. I think you've got the foundation is you have to master the diet. You have to master the diet and lifestyle. I think that's absolutely key. Then there's some people who might need GLP-1s, and there's a tiny people that might need weight loss surgery. So, we have that spectrum, but they all have to master the diet and lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that, should be, I mean, and it really, should be mandatory when you're on those medications, but we know the system doesn't quite operate like that. Talk about the sort of team approach, right? You mentioned, health coaches, nutritionists, nurse diabetes educators, talk about that team approach versus, just being the doctor doing it.
You have to have a team. I'm sure you were talking about that before we got on here, Phil, for yourself. And I absolutely have to have a team. To be honest, implementing diet and lifestyle changes is hard. You've got patients that have been living one way for 50 plus years or whatever, and now you're telling them to live in a completely different way. And it takes more than just a 5-minute or 10-minute conversation. And so they need to have it come at them from various angles, from different subjects. So I love having a health coach in there. I can come in, talk to the patient about their medical issues and, what we're going to do, and kind of give them the overview and really look at their medications and such. My dietitian, she's a nutritional expert as well as dietitian and diabetic educator. She'll come in and she'll put the CGM on them. She'll explain how it works, get them all set up for the sharing and everything. The health coach comes along, and then she's going to talk about the ongoing process and how this works. Meantime, I'm freed up to finish my note and go on to the next patient. So you kind of develop this process, of working people through. And then we have the low carb bootcamp model so that, I think Tro is doing this and other people. I haven't done this yet, but we certainly have the model where we could go to a business. We could go to John Deere is big here. Okay. So we could go to John Deere and, we could give them, this education in mass, and do group kind of things with them too. So it allows flexibility when you have a team like that to be able to do, this in various venues and in various means. We take advantage of the online, resources and everything too. And so people can go at their own pace and their own rate. And if they don't finish it in 8 weeks, that's fine. There's no rush to this. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So people can go at their own rate. But I think that's helpful. And for the really tough people who need more serious help with food addiction, we have that, food addiction specialist who can delve into those issues. And that's helpful. So all of that, I couldn't do this alone. That's for sure.
I want to go back to that number of addictions. Did you say 1 in 3?
That's about what I'm seeing, is about 1 in 3 patients who come to see me. The Yale Food Addiction Scale, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a 35 questionnaire, and it goes through these different, and it's a scientifically validated diagnostic tool for making a diagnosis of food addiction, which is a thing. And if they answer certain questions at a certain level, then that meets that criteria of mild, moderate, or severe. And so most of, about a third of them have food addiction. If they do, most of the time it's severe, mostly binge eating
And you're
disorder.
seeing it reversed. You're seeing people break their addictions with, I guess, nothing more than this diet and lifestyle change.
That's what's remarkable, Jack, is, I'm not counseling them, or we're not talking about it. We're not really, talking about how their attitudes to food are or anything like that.
Yeah.
We're just doing it. And, I think the thing is your brain loves beta hydroxybutyrate. I mean, it really just does. And, when people enter that space, and you're also doing what we do with alcoholics, right? You can't have a little bit of alcohol.
Yeah.
You've got to get rid of it. And so when you're getting rid of the sugar, especially the fructose, you're eliminating that. We talk about ways of, doing a kitchen clean out, so we always talk to them about, hey, your environment, trumps, willpower every time. We're not going to rely on willpower, so get it out of your house or get it out of your break room. And, we give them some practical tools and lists of things that they need to get out of their house. And, we get that kind of set up. And remarkably, most of them, once they do that, and the other thing is cool is that the food is awesome. And we're not asking them to eat a bunch of cardboard. I mean? The food is rich, it's delicious, it's really great. And so a lot of them, these are foods that they thought were off limits in the past.
Right.
And so now they're enjoying this, they're satiated. I mean, if I tell them, look, rule number one is if you're not hungry, don't eat. And by golly, if you're hungry, you're not doing keto right. There's just no way. If you're prioritizing protein, man, I mean, that kicks up PYY and GLP-1. And I mean, it's going to make you satiated. There's just no way you're going to be hungry. And if you are hungry, eat more protein. And, so I tell my patients to do that. And when they do, man, I track everybody, like I say, they come back after a month, almost 95% of them are down to 2, maybe 1 meal a day, no snacking, they're not hungry, and they're satisfied. So that's helpful. And it's not craving, like I tell them, okay, if you're hungry for popcorn, okay, that's a craving, right? Because it's specific. Hunger's not specific. The old phrase, I'm hungry enough to eat a horse, is true. Well, so I'll ask patients like, are you hard-boiled egg hungry? Does that sound good? Because if it does, then great, have a hard-boiled egg, right? But if it doesn't, you're like, no, I'd rather have a cookie. Then that's a craving. Go drink a big glass of water, go for a walk, distract yourself. Give them some mechanisms to get over it.
Oh, crud! You got me thinking about cookies and popcorn, and I forgot my follow-on question.
Got your craving going.
My experience has been. Oh, I know what it was. Yeah, when we interviewed the steak and butter gal in the first year of the podcast, and I remember her talking about just eating sticks of butter because she had been severely malnourished. And I remember before I gave up bread, I used to just tell people that I considered bread a butter delivery vehicle. I wasn't eating it for the bread. I was eating it for the butter. And that gave me the freedom to just start eating butter. But that wasn't my follow-up question. My follow-up question was protein. If you follow the kinds of people online that I follow, there's a particular metric for calculating how much protein a person needs. What do you tell people? How do you decide what's the right amount of protein?
Yeah. I'll make a caveat with this is I'm a pro-protein guy. So I did a literature search on this, and it's astounding. You almost never see this in the literature, but if you look at higher versus lower protein, studies, and I don't care whether you're looking at weight loss, diabetes, food addiction, or other satiety, other issues, higher protein wins, like every time, like there's no exception. Okay. And, there's almost no downside to that. It doesn't hurt your kidneys. I've looked at all that stuff, and satiety is great. So the USDA dietary guidelines are, they're crazy, 0.8 grams per kilo per day. That is the minimum you need to prevent like sarcopenia, like your muscles from, breaking down. So that's ridiculous. 1.2, I think, grams per kilo is minimum. And then, when you start getting up to 2 or more, 2.5 grams per kilo, that's higher. So roughly, if you look at it in pounds, 1 gram per pound is maybe a little easier. That's a fair amount. And honestly, I don't see a big upper limit to that. I mean, you got these, bodybuilder guys who are eating crazy amounts of protein maybe, but, really, if you're getting into that 1 gram per pound weight per day, I think that's awesome. So the only caveat with that is if ketosis really matters for you. So if you're like a cancer patient, so for my cancer patients, then this gets into the metabolism here where glutamine can be a stimulant for cancer cells. Of course, you're probably familiar with the Warburg effect, and, cancer needs a ton of glucose because it can't do oxidative phosphorylation, right? It can't utilize the glucose through the Krebs cycle because its mitochondria is screwed up. So it needs a ton of insulin, a ton of glucose. But a workaround for cancer is that it can use glutamine, which is an amino acid. And so if you're eating high protein and you're getting a lot of glutamine, that might be counterproductive. So we worry a little bit about that in cancer patients. So if you're battling cancer, that's a serious issue. You might need a little bit lower protein. You don't want to go too low to sarcopenic, but maybe in that 1 to 1.2 grams per kilo. That also, especially if you eat higher fat with that, might give you a little bit more ketosis. And again, you don't need a strong level of ketosis for weight loss or diabetes, but ketones matter when it comes to neurologic disorders, epilepsy, dementia, things like that, and cancer. So for many cancers, the higher your level of ketosis, the more effective that gets. Does that make sense? So I may be giving you too much information.
No, I think I'm with you.
So the protein thing in general has to be gauged for the person and their condition.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that is I think another condition where ketones are helpful is heart failure. And
yes,
we're certainly working with patients on that as well. So
I got an interesting patient with that. Can I share that? This is a woman I've followed for, oh my gosh, 5 years. So I live right in an area between 2 major tertiary care centers. Initials are Mayo Clinic and the University of Iowa. Okay, so I live right in between them. I had this patient. She had bad congestive heart failure with high pulmonary artery pressures. Phil, you'd recognize this. I mean, her pulmonary pressures are like 60, 70 millimeters of mercury. And our cardiologists were stumped. She had, a little bit of coronary disease, but sent her to both these tertiary centers. They tweaked her meds, but really couldn't help her very much. And she could barely, walk around in the room. I mean, she just was so short of breath and everything. She came to see me. She also had diabetes. I put her on the ketogenic diet. And I swear to you, within weeks, she's feeling better. Her diabetes reversed. She came off all her medication for her diabetes. She lost some weight. She wasn't huge to begin with, but she lost weight. She's normal weight. And then she started breathing better. And her pro-BNP, which is a marker of heart failure, was 680, right? It was really high. And I rechecked it again. It was normal. It's 57. And we repeated her echo about 6 months down the road. Her pulmonary artery pressures are 30. Okay, I mean, they're just cut in half. And now this is fast forward 5 years. She's on no medication, zero. She doesn't even take an aspirin. And she's walking the Mall of America. I mean, she has absolutely no exercise restriction whatsoever. So there's something, the heart is amazing. And as you know, and it can utilize all sorts of fuels, but when it goes sick, it wants ketones. And ketones really work well for that. In fact, it looks like that's why the SGLT2 inhibitors are indicated for congestive heart failure. It looks like they work because like keto, it's giving them some ketones. Yeah. So anyway, I agree totally.
Yeah, definitely. And even, again, we're seeing it with the GLP-1 medications, now being used. I forget if they officially have an indication now. I think they might for heart failure as well. And same thing. And like we said, I mean, the drugs are mimicking what the diet does without the side effects and without the concern for the medications.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, our
Yeah.
cardiologists, they're all afraid of keto, but then do they ever think, hey, what are the fastest growing cardiology drugs right now? They're all diabetic meds.
Yeah.
I mean, we're giving people without diabetes diabetic meds because they work great, because they're lowering insulin resistance and all the ketones, and they're doing all the benefits that we see.
Yeah, exactly. Great that I'm not the only crazy one seeing this out there, right?
No, absolutely not.
So yeah, let's talk about that perspective for a little bit. You started doing this, what kind of, I guess, did you have guidance from other physicians? Did you just sort of start doing this on your own? What have you been noticing among your colleagues now, right? Or are some of them, I know you said they're sending you patients, right?
Yeah.
Are any of them kind of asking, how do I do this? How can I do this for my patients?
Boy, I wish they would do that more, because that's kind of my goal, is to see this implemented much more broadly. But I think there is a growing interest in that. There was a initial skepticism. Now I think there's a pretty good acceptance, of this being, a very decent thing for many patients. And I think the next wave is going to be, especially once it's being taught in medical schools and stuff like that, I think that's where we need to go. And it starts becoming, actually implemented in practice. Yeah, we need to be doing this. So it's getting there, I think, but it's like a battleship, right? I mean, things turn slowly in medicine, very slowly.
That's a good point. And just in the 3.5 years we've been doing this podcast, we've seen significant changes. I would like to bring up the elephant in the corner of the room, which is the pharmaceutical companies, which do not benefit from people taking few of their high-priced drugs. And the outsized benefit, or the outsized influence that pharmaceuticals have exerted over the medical community for the last, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 years. Any comment you want to make about that?
Yeah, my gosh. I think, yeah, you're right. That is a huge issue, right? I remember, I used to have a drug rep swing by, he was always, doing insulin and stuff. And he's, hey, doc, when are you going to give this insulin a try? I go, I hope to never prescribe insulin for type 2 diabetes again. And I'll tell you, I haven't. I mean, it's been over 5 years since I've given anyone insulin, for that. And so it's contraindicated. I mean, and once you see that, there it is. I mean, I'm at a point in my career where I don't care. I mean, I get these little, I don't know if you get them, Phil. I get faxes from, the insurance companies. Oh my goodness, your patient's not on a statin. Oh, you're going to get dinged for that, or you're going to get, something else. I'm like, whatever. They don't have diabetes anymore. Does that count? Is that okay? I mean, it's just, it doesn't really matter, and they can't really hurt me. It's fine. But I think we got to get over that.
Yeah, thankfully, I really have no interaction with the insurance companies, so they don't even have my fax number to send me anything. And
yeah,
and I'm again, but maybe discuss that a little bit. I think we may have mentioned it previously, but from a primary care doctor's perspective, what is that? Because you do have these guidelines, right? And these quality metrics by which you're being judged. And, you're going against a lot of these things, right? And even something as simple as, the patient was a type 2 diabetic, you reversed it, but usually you can't really get that, from the insurance company's perspective, they're still a type 2 diabetic. And now they're not on medication. So you must be killing the patient.
it must be bad. It must be awful. Yeah. That's exactly right. And it's a game, that we play, and stuff like that. But it's far more than compensated in that the patients are, I mean, every day I have a patient hugging me. I mean, they're weeping. I mean, they're overjoyed. I mean, I can't see them fast enough. They're coming in. I mean, it's like I could care less anymore what any insurance company says to me, and my administration is, okay, Riggs is, got a 70% diabetes reversal rate here. We're going to give more gas on that fire because there's, who cares? We're in it. Life's too short, and, we're in it to help people. And I tell you what, I'm sure you can resonate with this, Bill. It's brought the joy back into medicine rather than me trying to live up to some kind of insurance company's expectations. That's ridiculous. Instead, let's talk about that patient that's sitting across the table from me, and they suddenly have a new lease on life, like that patient with heart failure I was just describing to you. I mean, that's what I went into medicine for. And, as an internist, you don't see people get better. I'm happy when their potassium's in the normal range, right? But now all of a sudden I've got this tool where, oh my gosh, we can actually reverse a lot of these things. And it's just astounding. So yeah, it has to be standard of care. I think in 10 years it will be. I hope it is. And I don't think we're going to get there by following the guidelines. We're just not. To me, I'm an old doc, guidelines, great, that's fine. But I kind of think you go to a doctor because you don't want to fit necessarily in the guidelines. You have to tailor this to an individual patient. And then we're going to use science. We're going to use our heads. We're going to do this with evidence. But that doesn't mean we have to walk in lockstep with an algorithm. I think that's the thing.
Have you seen secondary effects in your hometown? Restaurants changing, grocery stores changing. I don't know how big the town is where you live, but 5 years of doing this, treating people and seeing these kinds of positive results in some communities would make you locally famous or infamous.
Yeah, I don't know if I can attribute it to what I do necessarily, but we are seeing some changes. You're seeing more and more restaurants don't bat an eye now when you order a hamburger without the bun and you switch out the starch for, vegetables or something like that. And, I go into, fast food restaurants, say, just give me 3 hamburger patties. I don't want it. I don't want any bun on it. Just give me the patties. They don't even look at me sideways and it's done. You've got a lot more options available in the stores now. And I think really when you think about the food industry, they just want to make money. They just want to make that happen too. So I'm hoping, like with allulose, for example, you mentioned we're in Iowa. We're in you can thank us for all that high fructose corn syrup that's out there, right? I mean, we make so much corn that we turn it into gas or we turn it into high fructose corn syrup. And, what if we could just turn it into allulose, right? I mean, allulose is an epimer of fructose. It's just a position of one hydroxyl group. And these big companies that are out here, these big factories that are taking all this corn and making fructose, I'm not a chemist, but I bet you it'd be a simple process to turn it into allulose. And as you know, allulose has a lot of positive metabolic benefits. If we could just make that one change, Iowa would not have to give up its monocrop agriculture. John Deere could still be making these ginormous tractors, which cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yes, I'd rather see a lot of these fields turn into pasture land for, raising grass-fed beef. But until then, maybe we could do it stepwise and do things like that. So when I see, Jack, when I see that kind of thing happening, then I'm going to be like, okay, now we're really starting to make a difference.
Speculate with me here. I did a little research, and by a little, I mean not very long, and my research assistant was named Grok. It may be good, it may not. But I was wondering what percentage of American farmland is devoted to producing industrial lubricants, which are commonly known as vegetable oils or seed oils, but I've decided I'm not calling them that anymore. What percentage of American farmland is devoted to growing these industrial lubricant crops? And it was something like 70%.
Wow.
And then my follow-up question was, what percentage of those crops, of that land that is devoted to creating industrial lubricant plants, is owned by giant agricultural, the Archer Daniel Midlands of the world? What percentage of that is owned? And I don't recall off the top of my head, but it was north of 30% of that land. But actually, I think it was north of 50%. But I don't want to exaggerate. And then finally, I asked, is the federal government subsidizing these crops?
Yes.
And the answer, of course, is yes. My wife and I inherited a farmland from her grandparents, and it's been in grassland since her grandparents passed 10, 15 years ago. And the heirs have been getting a check from the government to not grow anything. So I'm being paid to not grow whatever it is that's not growing there. But I know there's also subsidies for these crops. We've got to address the problem on the demand side, obviously. Any idea what it would do to the Iowa economy if it was addressed on the supply side? If, for example, Kennedy was able to say, if you own more than, pick a number, 5,000 acres, 10,000 acres, you don't get any kind of subsidy help. I don't know what the average size of a family-owned farm is in Iowa, but I'm just speculating. And I realize we're going way off the metabolic health field here, but this is something I think about. You know, our government has been paying to make us sicker, and now we've got an administration in place that says they want to make us healthier, and this is one of the places I think it could happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It'd be awesome if instead of subsidizing, corn and soybeans, we could subsidize grass-fed beef or just fruits and vegetables. I mean, that would be great. I think though there's an enormous amount of economic impact to those decisions, obviously. And, I think here in Iowa, agriculture obviously is very huge. And I'm sure there would be a big pushback to all of a sudden stop those subsidies. And I think that's true with anything. Once you're given any kind of subsidy or something like that, it's hard to take it back. But yeah, but we have to also make it a win-win. We don't want to just put farmers out of business. We've got to somehow help them make a living in a way that's healthier, perhaps, for the population.
I agree, but that's why my thought is there's got to be some sort of Archer Daniels Midland is not running a 640 acre farm. That's just not happening. They're tens of thousands of acres. I think it'd be worthwhile for somebody, dear audience members, the thousands and thousands of you who listen, to figure out kind of where the boundary ought to be. Family-owned farms versus these vertically integrated organizations. I'm not against vertical integration. I'm against the government subsidizing vertically integrated organizations that are clearly contributing to our bad health. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Those are big questions beyond my pay grade, I think. But I can tell you, just growing up here, that the days of the small family farm, I used to work on a 250 acre farm. I don't think they exist anymore. Those were bought up and, conglomerated years ago now. I mean, if you don't have 5,000 acres, you're small beans. Farming's a big business.
Yeah. All right. I think this is the second most encouraging interview for me we've ever done. Grace Price still remains number one, this 19-year-old who's out there helping save the world from the lunacy that is the entire cancer and healthcare industry. But to hear you talk about right there on the front lines, the positive results that you're getting with your patients and with the organizations that you work with to deliver actual healthcare, it is really exciting to know that is actually happening. The ship is turning. It's pretty cool. All right, tell us about how folks can get in contact with you and the kinds of things they might learn by doing so.
Sure. I'm in Iowa, so I'm kind of the old-fashioned doctor taking care of people in the clinic and stuff. So if you're in Iowa, here I am. I'm in Waterloo, and I'll send you my, website here for both work and for personal and the book and stuff like that. If people are interested in that, we can set that up.
Yeah,
But
definitely. encourage people to check out the book, Keto MD. It's excellent. And, it's like I said, I knew this was going to be a great conversation and love hearing about how this is put into practice. We spend a lot of time talking about the theory, and why this is good. But unfortunately, there are too few doctors, like we talked about earlier, actually doing it, and love discovering all the ones that are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my pleasure. Love that. Love that. Thanks so much for having me.
He's got a personal website I see here called livingbydesignketonutrition.com. That's a long one to remember, folks. We'll make sure that that's in the show notes. The book is Keto MD. He is Dr. Stephen Riggs. I'm sure you can find the book at the places that you get books. Well,
Amazon.com is number one. Yeah.
Amazon.com, yes.
Yeah.
He is Dr. Stephen Riggs, and this has been Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia. Thanks for joining us, folks. We're glad you were here. We look forward to talking to you next time.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovadia's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.